to love the talk that she's giving tonight. It's called 10 Stories, Intergenerational Conversations. Welcome, Dr. McColl.
Thank you, Jane, for that lovely introduction and for the opportunity to share my research with these good people. And thank you for joining us this evening. Does this conversation sound familiar to you? It took place among a group of friends, two of whom were the primary supporters for their aging mothers. Hey, how's your mom doing? Oh, thanks for asking. She's okay. But the last few times I've been there, she's told the same 10 stories over and over again. They're from 75 years ago, and I've heard them 100 times. I swear if I hear them one more time, I'm going to scream. We all laughed, and we knew exactly what she was talking about. But I couldn't get the idea out of my head. Were there really just 10 stories? And what was special about those stories? Why those stories and not some others? And why tell them over and over again? What were those stories really about? And was there something important going on here? As a professor and a researcher in disability studies and occupational therapy, those questions are slightly outside of my usual wheelhouse, but I couldn't leave them alone. So over the next several years, we interviewed middle-aged adult children, asking us to tell us the stories they felt they were hearing over and over again from their aging parents. Most people, it seems, assume that people tell the same stories over and over again because they forget having just told them. That may be true, but our research suggests there's a lot more to it than that. Here's what we've learned. First of all, there really are just 10 stories, give or take, that people tell over and over again. Most of our interviewees had no difficulty coming up with 10 or restricting it to 10 stories that their parent told and retold. We encouraged them to prepare for the interview by taking out a piece of paper and writing down the numbers 1 to 10 down the left-hand side, and jotting themselves a few notes to remind them of the stories they wanted to tell us once the interview began and the tape started to roll. Some of them said, oh, I don't need to do that. I can tell you my father's 10 stories right now. Others said, I'm going to have to go away and think about that. But in the end, they felt satisfied with the 10 they had chosen. While 10 is not a magic number, it does seem to be about the right number to permit people to feel they've done justice to their parents' stories. A second finding of our research is that a disproportionate numbers of the stories that people tell over and over again come from their teens and 20s, the second and third decades of life. That gives us a clue to what's important about those stories. The second and third decades of life are a time when important decisions are made that shape the rest of people's lives and when values are consolidated and the adult identity is formed. The third finding was that the key to the stories often lies in the teller's role and the values that guided their behavior. According to Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, life can only be understood backwards, although it must be lived forwards. Making sense of the life lived is one of the key tasks of older age. Psychologist Erik Erikson characterizes the final stage of life as reconciling the whole of one's life with its joys and sorrows, triumphs and regrets, achievements and disappointments. This process requires the resolution of the personal myth. The personal myth is the overarching story we tell ourselves about who we are, what qualities define us, what's important to us, and what we stand for. And it's called a myth rather than a history for a reason. It's important to remember that stories aren't just sitting there waiting to be called up and recounted. Remembering and telling stories is an active, creative process. Our stories are constructed rather than just retrieved from memory. Think of the storyteller as a minstrel or a raconteur rather than as a librarian or an archivist. And think of the stories as paintings rather than photographs. While the image may have been registered in an instant, the final product is rendered over time. We fill in details. We correct flaws. We paint over inconsistencies. What's important about those stories is not the factual details. Those can be vague, dubious, and even downright conflicting. What's important is the meaning embedded in the stories, the lesson your loved one learned, or the value that was reinforced in the story. In other words, the meaning they attribute to it. Here are a few examples from among the many stories that we've heard from our interviewees. Story number 1 is an amalgamation of several stories that were similar and that express the values of charity and gratitude. My dad had a job during the Depression, but many men did not. We called them hobos. They traveled on foot or rode the rails and slept in barns or sheds. Many times they stopped at the back door and asked through the screen for a bit of food. My mother, your grandmother, never refused and never judged, even though we didn't have much to spare. She reminded us how lucky we were not to have to beg or to go without. Story number 2 was told by Alan to his daughter. Alan was a child in England during the war, and this story seems to be a cautionary tale about the importance of good manners and the potential disadvantage created in their absence. I'll spare you the English accent, but you can imagine it for yourselves. During the war, we took in an evacuee from London, a Cockney child who arrived with lice. The whole family caught them before we could get it under control. The boy had uncultured speech and awkward habits, such as wiping his nose on his sleeve. We knew better than to do that. By the time laundry day came around, the boy's sleeve was stiff from wiping his nose. In story number 3, Grace tells her daughter about her own childhood as the child of missionary parents. It's a fascinating story about cultural sensitivity, or the lack thereof. My mother believed her culture to be superior to the culture where we were living at the time, and she insisted that we do things the way she had learned to do them. So at church every Sunday, we had to stand up, sit down, kneel at different times from the rest of the congregation. And because she also insisted on occupying a front pew, everyone could see us. I felt so embarrassed. Who knows what they thought of us? These are just a few examples of the kinds of stories interviewees shared that they had heard from their aging parents. Virtually every story has a meaning or a point that's readily discernible, a value that the elder is seeking to communicate. Values like the importance of family, the benefits of hard work, resilience in overcoming hardship, a sense of humor even in hard times, the value of education, the need to speak up against injustice. Our research also offers some tips for listening for the 10 stories. First of all, focus on just 10. It can make the listening seem much less overwhelming. Second, write them down. It can be useful to step away from them and look at them with a degree of detachment to try to figure out what they're really about. Writing also challenges us to get the details correct and the sequences straight. Notice your loved one's role in the story. as the message is often contained in that role. Be attentive to feelings, sensations, tensions, discomfort. These can be signals or clues to the meaning of the story. For example, sensory vividness. There's often a sound, a sight, or a smell that brings a story to life. Emotional intensity. Watch for strong emotions, positive or negative. Joy, sorrow, shame, pride, to name a few. Repetition. The same theme, the same character, the same location may show up in multiple stories, thus validating its importance and giving us a clue to the underlying meaning. Finally, remember that these stories are for you, selected and told in the context of your relationship with your loved one. Stories exist in the context of a relationship. They have both a sender and a receiver. Our research suggests that the 10 stories are curated for the individual receiving them. They would be different if told to another sibling, a spouse, or a friend. As such, they are a gift chosen specifically for you from a loved one who is running out of time. Millions of middle-aged and older adults fulfill caregiving and support roles for their aging loved ones. Having to listen to the same stories over and over again can feel like the straw that breaks the camel's back. This research was an attempt to ease the burden of caregiving by shedding new light on the phenomenon of repeated storytelling. In the past 10 years, I have cared for both parents and my husband leading up to their deaths. And as I suspect some of you know, caregiving is often not very glamorous. The reciprocity in the relationship is often not what it once was. Your loved one's behavior is not at its best and may be suboptimal. And yet you are called upon to show up and be your best self 24/7. Our hope is that by better understanding the concept of the 10 stories, it might allow caregivers and supporters to listen to the stories in a new way and understand the messages they contain, to know their loved one at a deeper level, to assist their parent to achieve the reconciliation of identity that they seek, and to validate that they have been seen and heard and will be remembered. People don't tell the same stories over and over again because they're losing their minds, but because the stories are important and you need to know them. Telling stories repeatedly isn't about forgetfulness or dementia. It's a last-ditch effort to share what's important with you. Try to hear what the 10 stories are desperately trying to tell you before it's too late. They're a gift, and they're for you. Thank you for your kind attention.